Mr. Saline,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meisgeier.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is that we currently have a vacancy as vice chair. And this is a meeting that we will try to elect a new vice chair. Are there any nominations that anyone would like to bring forward for vice chair?
I nominate Zach Carp.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Are there any other nominations that anyone would like to offer?
Speech.
Would you like to say anything, Zach?
I will do my best, and I'll start praying for Rich not to miss any meetings.
Thank you. Okay, we have a nomination. We have a second. No further discussion is apparent, so let's do a roll call.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meisgeier,
Yes.
Mr. Saline.
Yes.
Motion carries. Congratulations, Zach.
Thank you.
I know you do a fine job. And I'll try to make all my meetings if I can.
I'll try to make all the meetings.
Item number 5, we have a new board member sitting to my immediate right. His name is Chad Meisgeier. Chad, welcome.
Thank you.
On behalf of the board and staff. Would you like to say anything, introduce yourself to the group?
Sure, appreciate it. Honored to be appointed. Appreciate in advance you all being patient with me as I learn the process. Name's Chad Meisgeier. I'm currently the Chief Financial Officer for Millard Public Schools. So that's what I do in my day job. Accounting degree, law degree, both from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the prior century, back in the 1900s. Married for 30 years, 3 children, ages 23, 20, and 16. So it's a busy life.
Well, welcome.
Thank
Glad
you.
to have you.
Welcome.
Just so the rest of the board knows, we did have a voluntary orientation about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Appreciate that.
So he does have a little bit of a head start, but I know, as he knows as well, there's a lot to learn.
Yes,
Which will all be very helpful.
appreciate that.
Item number 6 is the forecast. For this, we turn to, who would like to start?
I will go first. So for Chad that doesn't know me for now, my name is Bob Pan. I'm with the Department of Revenue. I will present the forecast from the Department of Revenue side. So the forecast that we sent out last week. So, and for this particular forecast, the data used is from Moody and ISS. Is what the latest forecast they put out, which is early October. I think they released it on October 10th, I believe. And that's the data that we use to drive most of the forecast. So just an overview of the macro U.S. macroeconomic. Third quarter GDP grew at 2.8%. I think most of the services asked for about 3%. So we came in a little bit lower than what projected. Unemployment rate, very strong employment, 4.1 is still, I think most economists believe about 4.4% would be the natural rate of unemployment. So we still under that. The economy at roughly 167,000 jobs for April to September. Very strong employment in September. Nebraska is even stronger than that. We stand at 2.6% unemployment rate. And Moody basically assumed our employment will be strong for the forecast horizon, which is maxed out at 2.8% by late 2026. So here's the GDP for forecast for both of the services, just for comparison purposes. Moody assumed basically a higher economic growth through 2029, above 2%. And S&P is below 2%, because they think the economy needs to cool below potential, which is about 2%, for inflation to stick at 2.5%. Unemployment rate, similarly, Moody unemployment maxed out at 4.1 in 25, and then kind of stay at 4% for the forecast horizon, where S&P assume a little bit worse employment market, where the unemployment rate get to 4.6% in 27. Monetary policy, so the Fed stopped cutting interest rate, and they expect to cut that again next week. S&P basically assume about a 2%, 2.5% by mid-2026 in that range. Moody is about 3%. So both of them have basically 50 basis point difference between the two forecast services. Consumer, so this is kind of inflation index. This is quarter over quarter, so basically it's this quarter over last year quarter. So you can see S&P this year is about 2%, but then it's going to drop to 1.7, below 2% for the first two quarters. It's quarter over quarter, and that's because the result here is quarter one of 24 was still high, so it's just a inflated base basically. But then it's kind of quarter over quarter about 3% in 26, 7% inflation for this year, and then drop closer to 2.5% next year, and then kind of stay around there. This, so this is more for Chad, seen my slide before, so I will go through this slide. So the Federal Reserve of the Bank of Philadelphia put out a business index. It's basically they create a 50-state index that time the growth of GDP for each of the states with the United States. Based on 4 factors here: non-farm payroll employment, average hourly work, unemployment rate, and wage and salary. So this gives us basically a proxy for output for the 50 states so that we can compare each of the states against each other on the same base and then compare to the United States. One reason why we put this graph up, so the red line is for Nebraska growth, and then for the blue line is the U.S. Because our forecasts derive from the national U.S. indicator forecast that provided by ISSA. So we need the growth rate to be somewhat comparable to use those data for driving our forecast. If that's way too different, then we can't use the national data to do our forecast. So as you can see here, Nebraska is very similar to the United States on average. See some growth here and there, but for the most part, we grow in basically very similar pattern of trend. Another point graph here is, so this is employment, non-motor vehicle net taxable sales. Our sales tax is basically a direct function of net taxable sales. As you can see here, if you look at the forecast, sales tax is still weak, and this basically explains that you have 23 here, basically sort of flat out, and then this is the growth during the pandemic when people were having money and spend the saving and stay at home, catching up spending, whatever the case may be, but that stopped run out, where we start to see taxable sales start to slide. And I put this graph on this first time. This is Nebraska consumption expenditure broken out by durable goods. So you see here, this line is durable good, non-durable good, and then this is good combined. That's the service, and that's the total of service and good. We'll see here the non-durable are growing very fast compared to historical data for the period of 2020 to 2022 roughly. Then it stopped flat out. That's when our sales tax stopped to slow. And that's basically the forecast up to 2024. It's going flat from 23 to 24, the end of this year, and then start to grow again. So the U.S. GDP growing because of consumer spending still spend a lot of money, But it's just that the share between services and goods are not growing at the same rate. Services tend to grow, still growing, but not the goods sector. That has an impact on sales tax. As you well know, most services don't tax subject to sales tax. On the bright side, employment still is growing. We have, low unemployment rate, so that's a good thing for withholding. Withholding will continue to be strong, and that's so in our forecast also. So how did we end up with fiscal year 2023, 24 actual versus forecast? So if you look at the total, we missed the forecast by 0.1%, which is 10 million, right? Well, I tell people that we are right for the wrong reason. Right? So, and the reason is income tax, right? So the income tax, we missed the forecast by 320 million, but if you look at corporate income tax, it's the positive of almost the exact same amount. This has everything to do with the PTET. Back in February, when we put in the forecast, our PTET assumption was roughly 900 million, 95 million if I remember correctly. Actual data come in, we get more payment in March and April, that we end up with 1.3 billion in PTET for last fiscal year. So the PTET money coming in, made by S corporation, show up in corporate income tax. And the refund, when it go back out, show as individual income tax refund. So it's just a mismatch of the tax category rather than fundamental. So I just want to point that out. Pass-through entity, I put this slide last time, but I will go over it again for Jeff here. So Nebraska, we passed the pass-through entity tax, which I call PTET. This allows the pass-through entity to elect and subject to Nebraska income tax at the entity level. Then when they do that, the partner or the shareholder will get a credit for the same amount that paid by the entity, where they can claim it on their individual income tax return when they file their taxes. Nebraska was the only one of the two states allowed for retroactive to tax year 2028, the other state being Colorado.
Hey, Wapu, so,
Yes.
and maybe you're about to talk about this, but how much of that difference between the 900 million and the 1.3 was past tax years versus current tax years?
We can't really drill down to that, but the assumption is everything that paid in fiscal year 23-24 was claimed on the 2024 tax return. 23 tax return, sorry. 24 tax return is next year when you file, which is what we will collect in this year. And my assumption right now is we will get 250 million going forward for every tax year in terms of PTET money.
That'll be kind of the normal level.
That's a normal level on a year-over-year basis. Again, that is what I have right now. That number can fluctuate a lot, as you can see from last year. But if we think of the retroactive, which is about 5 years, and we collect about 1.3 billion, I take that divided by 5, give me roughly 250 million, 300 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. That's the assumption we're going with right now. Right. So.
As good a guess as any, right?
Yeah. That's better than a completely guess, right? We have 5 year data, so we just divide it by 5.
That's it.
This just walk through how the individual get the tax benefit, which I will not tell. So this is the data here. This is early October, probably before October 15. So this does not include the people file extension on October 15. So the total payment received, the total we get is 1.463 billion of that, split between roughly about 70-30 between individual and corporate. This is the amount we get in 23, 24, 1.33 billion, and the corporate is almost 900 million. This is the amount we get for fiscal year 24, 25, and this is basically what I will assume is for tax year 24, which they will show, the credit will be show up in the 2024 tax return. when they file next year. This is how much been claimed up to October 10th, 922 million. Of that amount, 656 million we claimed in fiscal year 23-24, which already done. Up to, for the current fiscal year, up to October 10th, there will another 266 million claimed. So basically, that leaves us with 400 million roughly in credit that will be claimed from now until the end of this calendar year, I would assume. This 407 million does not include the people who filed in October yet. October data came in at, I believe my memory serves me right, is roughly 300 million in credit already claimed in this October, with the not on this data. So if you take that 400 million, subtract off 300 million, that's roughly 100 million left in PTED credit that need to be claimed. However, based on all the state experience with the PTED, not all credit will be claimed. So if you assume, or I assume 95% of it will get claimed, that means 5% left. If you take 5% of that 1.3 billion, that's roughly 70 million. So 100 million left, about 70 million of that not being claimed. So we have about 50 million left in credit to be claimed this year. And then that will wash out the PTED for that 1.3 billion. So we should be done with the PTED very soon here. For that 1.3 billion. And then every year after that, we assume will be 300 million, 250 or 300 million, but that will not impact refund completely because people will not pay an estimated payment. As you will see when they get to estimated payment, you see the drop, very significant.
Walter, if the federal tax system changes so that there's no incentive to do this anymore, what impact would that have as it unwinds?
Well, we have not get there yet. So right now, technically the PTED doesn't really impact in the overall state tax revenue. It's just shifting from one thing to another. So if that's the case, then we will see corporate shifting back to individual, where individual are making estimate payment again. But we don't know how many of them will go back to that. I don't know the business model that benefit or not benefit them, or whatever the case may be do. And we have no idea what the federal will do next year when the Tax Cut Job Act is up. So that's just where we are at. This forecast assumes whatever in the book stay for now.
Until Tuesday.
Until whenever that is, yes.
So if I understand you correctly, you're saying there's about 300, you expect 330, let's say round numbers,
300 million.
to be taken, to be credited back the calendar year 23.
This 400 million is for tax year calendar 23, yes.
Yeah.
And we are already seeing 300 million of that.
Yeah.
So it's not like,
But October 15th was presumably the last day that everybody was going to do anything. So it'll be stragglers coming in. So
it's just small amount. So that's why it's a little about like 30 or 40 million left,
Yeah.
which is fair. The fiscal year to date, this is compared to the forecast that we did back in February, plus whatever happened in the session and the special session. It's all, we recalculate that forecast plus the changes in those two legislative sessions. Sale and use tax for the first 3 months, we are running about 40 million below forecast. Individual income, about 83 million below forecast, and this have a lot to do with final payment and estimate payment. Basically a switch of corporate income tax. Income tax went up 105 million compared to forecast, and of that 105 million, you go back here, that basically 90 million, 97 million that is account for that growth. So right now we're running about 5 million higher than the forecast. Where's my October? I have another slide for October projected. I don't know where it is now on my slides. Might come back to that at the end. But anyway, that slide will show a negative roughly 15 million for October. We are running behind forecast by roughly 15 million. I think Keisha might get to that. Let's see.
Is that because of PTAT refunds or not?
No, PTAT refund actually, we put in 195 million in refund this month. I think we come in at 175, but the month is done, so some of that will get pushed into November because we can't process all that refund in 2 weeks. So it will show up. But if PTAT will take in at projected at 195, then it would be another 20 million negative. But if that's the case, then we just take money from November and push it back. So it's built in. It's just shifting up the month to month. That makes sense?
Cash flow timing.
Yes. Cash flow time. Yes. That's all it is. So the revised forecast for 24-25, sale and use tax. The period forecast is 2.6 billion roughly. The new forecast call for reduction of roughly 125 million. S&P and then 100 million in Moody. Individual income tax reduction of 25 million. Corporate income tax increased by 50 million. Miscellaneous of 32. So overall forecast, we are looking at negative 147 million. S&P and 145 million for Moody, roughly 145 million for both forecast and services data. 25-26. So this will be the first time the board will make a forecast for 25-26. So I don't have any comparison. But sale and use tax will go up by 3.8 and 4.4% respectively. Individual 25-26%. The growth in individual here. So I need to talk a little bit more about this 24-25. The reason 24-25. So the PTC is ending, right? The property tax refundable income tax credit is ending. So there will be no more refund for property tax paid in April of 2025. That will go up, but a lot of this PTAT, this number being low because we get the PTAT. So there's still 600 million basically in this number we do to PTAT refund that we got last fiscal year. So that's a low base. When we go to 25-26, we see an increase of 25 or 26%, get us back to about 3.2 billion roughly. So the PTC is ending, the PTAS is kind of phasing out in terms of refund. And another thing is, so there's only a small portion of the PTC is left, which is the community college. That is still in there, but a lot of the PTC is gone. So that's why you see that number is a lot higher than previous year. 26-27, sales use tax grow back to 3%, 3.2%. Individual tax decline. This mainly is just a tax rate cut to get us to 3.99%. And then corporate income tax kind of stay the same, drop by 5%, and miscellaneous 6 and 8%. Overall, the forecast is about flat year over year, just because the tax cut is quite significant. It's just some history of sales and use tax. So we grow in pretty significantly between those periods, pandemic, and then we should go back to and here. Given the graph that I showed earlier on consumption, Nebraska consumption data. Individual income tax, again, this is just because of shifting the money and then the tax cut and PTAT. So withholding remains strong. The drop here is we are changing the withholding table every January 1st to account for the tax rate change so that we don't refund our money back to taxpayer when they file the tax return. So that just reflecting the change in the total table, have nothing to do with employment. We still see a very strong employment market. Final payment, again, that has a lot to do with the PTED. We should see less of that now, and then, so we see a drop here and then kind of stabilize. Estimate payment, here's the, so we go from basically, 450-ish million around 23. We dropped last year to 276, and again, that's just the PTED switching payment. And last year was only 9 months because the bill passed in June or something like that, and people don't adjust for it until September. So we have the extra month of estimate payment in June was high. And then as we expect it to drop down to about 225 to 200 million in that range. It's just shifting from corporate income tax, take it out, estimated payment. This is refund, so you can see that here we don't assume any more refund on PTED out here. Not everything, but small amount. This is the PTED payment plus the PTC. 24-25, you still have the PTED, but you don't have the PTC anymore. So it's dropped a little bit there, and then go back to about $650 million range. Corporate income tax, that's the PTED portion. Then we expect them to come down to 945 and then drop a little bit here and there. Again, the tax cut also impact corporate income tax. We also take that down to 3.99 by 2027. So you see a gradual decline of that just because of the tax rate. Miscellaneous, nothing much to discuss here. A lot of that has to be with transfer, which not really forecast driven or fundamental, that is. So total revenue sheet. So last year we get PTED refund half of it. They still have it to be refund. That's why this dropped to 6.3 billion. Then that should take up to about 6.97 billion, 6.95 and then 6.93 or 7 billion over here if you use Moody. So I wasn't intending to show this graph, but it didn't pop up. This is one of the drivers that we use for corporate income tax receipt. This is state and local tax receipt corporate income for the United States. This is for the entire country. You can see the big jump in corporate profit, the corporate income tax here between 2020 and 2023. A lot of states are seeing massive jump in corporate income tax, and then the forecast basically stops slowing down in the out year, which reflects our forecast also. That's nice one. Any question? That's all I have.
Okay, Keisha.
Is it gonna work? Okay, my name is Keisha Patel. I'm the Legislative Fiscal Analyst, and I'll be presenting information on behalf of the Legislative Fiscal Office. I included this slide again. I was actually going to take it out, but we have a new member, so for the benefit of the new member. This just explains under the statute what the schedule is for the Forecast Advisory Board. And of course, we're in an even number year, so we review the current year forecast, and then the forecast board will revise that forecast and then set the forecast for the upcoming biennium, those 2 years. We have 3 months of actual receipts, almost 4 months of actual receipts for purposes of reviewing this fiscal year. So, and then of course, there will be a February meeting, and because it is an odd numbered year coming up, there will be an April meeting. So, that seems kind of dim for some reason. Not sure why. So this is, as Wafu mentioned, the forecast that the board set in February has been adjusted twice. Once for the 2024 regular session and once for the 2024 special session. So this shows the impact of those adjustments. During the 2024 session, there were about 10 or 11 bills that affected general fund revenue. Those can all be looked at. There's a description of those starting on page 42 of our report. This is the total sum of all of the impact of those bills on the forecast. You can see for this current year, the February forecast was just over 5.8 billion. And then there were about $49 million of increased revenue for this fiscal year related to 2024 session bills. There was also a slight reduction, about 11 million and 23 million for the next two fiscal years. Then with the special session, there was another adjustment made, and this shows there were two bills that affected general fund revenue in special session, and this shows the impact of those bills. For more description in our report, you can start on page 38, and it goes through what the impacts of those bills are and more details about those bills. But it would increase the total general fund revenues from the July certification, which adjusts for 2024 session, from 5.9 billion to about 6.5 billion, based on the adjustments related to the session legislation. And then, again, I just want to point out, Wafu mentioned, of course, this is the first time that the board is setting a forecast for fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27. The data shown here and on the previous slide are estimates that were published by our office beginning of last biennium related to what a potential revenue for those fiscal years. Of course, those aren't board official estimates, but they are provided by our Office for Legislative Planning. So I've shown that here since you'll be working with those two fiscal years. So this relates to our actual revenue related to the fiscal year that just ended. I did show, so the number in the very bottom corner, negative 10.6 million, that is the amount that we ended up below forecast. If you look at the February forecast adjusted for legislation. One of the things that I wanted to show here too is that obviously the board had opportunities to revise the forecast. There was the initial certified forecast back in July of 2023, and then there was a revision in October and a revision in February. So this reflects how actual receipts ended up as compared to all three of those forecasts by the board. As Wafu said, it was very close. The 10.6 million is a very small percentage of actual receipts. And I won't talk about the same things that he talked about. But I do want to point out that we did see very high miscellaneous receipts last fiscal year, which Wafu didn't talk about too much. And part of that was legislative action that caused that. We did also have about $89 million of interest on investments that was credited to the general fund. That's usually something the board is interested in hearing about. And insurance premium tax was also very strong. So we did have very strong growth in miscellaneous tax receipts for last fiscal year.
How big are insurance premium taxes? Is that a significant number in the overall?
It was just about 70 million last year, so it's not, I mean, it is relative to miscellaneous tax receipts of a fairly large percentage.
And how much did it jump from the year before?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it has been steadily increasing over the last several years. So it's been fairly,
Insurance premiums are going up.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
yep.
I want to say it was like 64 million the year before, but I don't want to, I might not be exactly 100% on. So this shows our fiscal year to date, fiscal year 25 revenue to date. Walker went through a lot of this already. So I'll talk a little bit about October. As of this morning, the state was $12.8 million below forecast. Sales and use tax was about 15.5 million below forecast. So that's contributing to that quite a bit. Individual income tax was a little bit above and corporate income tax was a little bit below. And then miscellaneous tax was a little bit below. So the main driver of being below forecast this month, from my take, I guess, is the sales and use tax is slightly below what was estimated.
Do you think that will continue?
Well, yes. I agree with Wafu, and when we get to our forecast, you can see that too. The analysis relative to a shift back to purchase of services with a lot of consumer spending. So I think that's a continuing trend. We have seen sales tax below forecast several months in a row, I believe.
It was below in September too.
Yes. I have a slide on that.
There you go.
And it's not just in Nebraska.
Yeah, so sales and use tax, I'll just skip ahead to this slide since you asked the question. This shows by type of tax by month. So for this fiscal year, the first month was about 21.5 million below, then about 7.5 million, and then about 10.5 million for September. And then, as I said, for October, it's about 15 million. So we've been, the state has been running fairly consistently, just slightly below forecast on sales tax. So I don't really have any reasons to believe it's going to change in the immediate future, that this softening trend will continue, at least through this fiscal year.
So people are not buying as many things which are taxed at a higher rate than services. They're spending more on services which are taxed lower, which is why they're
Yes, or not taxed, yeah.
not taxed.
Mhm. Yeah, I guess this just separates it out by category. You can see we're below on sales tax refunds as well, which does help a little bit, but yeah, I don't want to, I guess unless you have another question, I'll go back forward. So these are some of the factors that I selected, I suppose, that I think are contributing to the data from S&P and Moody's that's affecting the forecast. One thing I do want to talk about briefly too is that that's not necessarily represented on this chart, is that in our report, we provided a state-by-state look at GDP growth and personal income growth. And that was from the second quarter of this year. And in both of those cases, Nebraska had very strong growth in GDP and personal income for the second quarter. And one of the big drivers of that is farm income and farm receipts. Livestock market has been very strong so far this year. So I did want to qualify that a little bit by saying that in those reports, it shows considerably higher growth in Nebraska as compared to the national numbers, but related to farm income, that may be seasonal because some other reports that I've seen have shown that net farm income for this calendar year is actually anticipated to decline over last year. Last year was record high farm income in Nebraska and across the country. And it is anticipated that net farm income this year will be lower by about 17% in Nebraska than it was last year because of crop receipts and lower crop insurance. So the increase in the livestock gains may be will be offset by potentially lower income in the crop sector. And that will continue throughout next year too. There's anticipated to be a very slight decline from 2024 to 2025 in terms of net farm income in the state of Nebraska, mostly due to input prices. So that's not on the chart, but I wanted to talk about it. The only other thing that I'll point out here is that as compared to February, one of the variables that changed significantly is the estimation of the growth in the stock market. Back in February, it was anticipated that there would be pretty modest growth in the stock market, 3.6% this year and 0.2% next year. And in October, in S&P's forecast, they revised that to show an estimate of 20.8% growth in 2024 and then a slight decline in 2025. So that is the variable, I suppose, with the most noticeable change relative to the forecast service. I included this slide too, mostly so I could talk about cash fund balances. This is the U.S. Fed funds rate since 2020. So obviously there was a decline in 2020 and then it's been increasing ever since then, up until last month when the Fed lowered the rate by 0.5 percentage point. It's anticipated it will decrease by another 0.5 percentage point yet before the end of the year, and that there will be continued decreases after that over the year following. Relative to interest on investments, in our forecast, our projection is anticipated to decline over the forecast period, even with during the special session, they credited additional interest to the general fund from various other state funds, cash funds and revolving funds. But we are anticipating a cash balance decline throughout as we go towards the end of this fiscal year and then into the following 2 fiscal years. So even if interest rates don't change a lot, there would be potentially less interest on investments because of a declining cash balance. In case you're curious, the general fund cash balance as of today is very close to $1.7 billion. But we are anticipating it will decline by several $100 million by the end of the fiscal year. The cash reserve fund balance is $938 million, and the fiscal year ending balance that's anticipated is $877 million. So less change in cash reserve fund cash balance, but there is some anticipated change in general fund cash balance.
What's the significance of the interest? How big is the interest that we're earning?
So last year, out in fiscal year 24, the miscellaneous receipts were about $490 million, and about $90 million of that was interest on investments. So these are our forecast numbers for 24, 25, 25, 26, and 26, 27. And it didn't seem that small. That's really small. I should have probably split this up into more slides. So I apologize. I hope you can read it. I'll start with 24, 25. Our Moody's forecast and S&P are both very similar to each other. One is 6.34 billion. The other one is 6.34 billion. So they are very, very close to each other. Ooh, sorry. I didn't mean to do that. There's only about $300,000 difference. So not too much difference between the services. We do have, I want to point out, and I have another slide about this too. Our forecast is a little bit different from the Department of Revenue's forecast in how the PTET was factored in, mostly because we do not have access to all of the data set that the Department of Revenue has. And so we did not do as much of a adjustment relative to estimated payments versus refunds, and instead factored it in as refunds for the PTET claimed for individual income tax. So you'll see for the next year's, our refunds are quite a bit higher, and that is mostly related to that.
Is there a firewall between your two
For
departments?
a record, I do share data.
Yes. There's certain data that they do share a lot of data, but there is certain taxpayer-specific data that obviously they can't share. And when you're looking at, how many filers file and claim a particular thing, like we do get that data, but not as we don't have access to it until later. till we don't have access to like fiscal year tax data until,
So there's a legal reason for this.
yes. So in our forecast, just like in the Department of Revenues, we see a shift from individual income tax to corporate income tax. The change from the current forecast is down here at the bottom. Relative to individual income tax, it's a reduction of about 240 million, and an increase in corporate tax of about 175 to 180 million. So that, of course, is due to the PTET provisions. Sales tax, we have estimated a reduction from the current forecast of about 102 million for fiscal year 25, and then a slight gain in miscellaneous taxes, 29 million. So for next fiscal year 26, we have estimated net receipts in Moody's and S&P about 2.6 billion, just over 3 billion, about 3.1 billion in individual income tax, and 850 to 860 million in corporate income tax. Miscellaneous tax will decline, as I said, mostly due to interest on investments and a couple other small things. For fiscal year 27, our forecast is set about 2.7 billion. Both of our services, again, are very similar to each other, even in those years, but $2.7 billion about for sales and use tax, just over $3 billion in individual tax, and $830 million in corporate income tax. So again, that takes into account the rate change in income tax as well. So this is a chart that compares our forecast estimates to the Department of Revenue's forecast estimates. Our forecast estimate is slightly higher in sales tax for most of the years and most of the services. So our S&P forecast is higher in sales tax than Department of Revenue's for all three of those fiscal years, and then very similar under the Moody's model. The first 2 years and slightly higher the third year. The biggest difference is probably in individual income tax. Our forecast is slightly lower than Department of Revenue's for all 3 years.
Why?
Well,
Different people.
yeah, different people running the model. Yeah, I think, so we did have, like a miscellaneous tax, I can explain some of the differences. We had different estimates of insurance premium tax, and ours it's flattening out, and Department of Revenues is still at a higher growth rate, but our forecast was higher on gaming tax and corporation occupation tax and a couple other things, so they kind of offset each other. I think what's driving the difference in individual income tax and corporate income tax is probably related to the PTET provisions.
In
And
fact, that wouldn't play out in 25, 26, or 27, 28.
Yeah.
You got pretty big differences between.
Yeah, our individual income tax, I think it's possible that we are potentially, I don't know how much I should go. I think we might be overstating refunds in individual income tax a little bit in those 2 years, which is why ours is lower by a little bit. So I think that's probably the main.
Since as you pointed out, the stock market is up, you said over 20%, a lot more than what our last forecast showed.
Yeah.
Is the wealth effect from people feeling richer than 9-10 months ago, is that baked into the forecast?
Yeah,
Is
I
it
mean,
significant?
Well, I think relative to personal consumption expenditures and the rate at which people are still purchasing those kinds of items, yes, it would be. There's also, of course, a variable for business investment. So relative to any gains that may be obtained at the business level and reinvested, there is a variable anticipated. I do think we've seen a little bit of a drop off of business fixed investment in the last few months because it had been very high earlier this year. And so it's a decline over a very high rate. So relative to potential capital gains, that would be captured and taxable. Yes, it is incorporated into the model, but I will say that capital gains are always a little bit volatile and difficult to estimate. So, okay, I'm gonna switch gears now after this and talk a little bit about some of the federal funds that have been received by the state. I was asked by the board to provide some additional information relative to this, so I put together in the booklet. It starts on, I think it's page 72, something like that. There's a lot of appendices in this forecast board report. But I'm going to start with some of the COVID funding. So the first two ones that were passed were the CARES Act, which was in the spring of 2020, and the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, which was actually passed in December of 2020. And those had a lot of very specific direct aid programs. Most of these you are probably very familiar with and have heard a lot about. Paycheck Protection Program. These numbers here are Nebraska numbers, how much Nebraska received under these programs, not national numbers. So Nebraska had about 5.4 billion. Economic impact payments, those were the stimulus payments to individuals. That was about $2.5 billion in Nebraska. There was coronavirus food assistance program to farmers, which was a total in Nebraska of about 1.6 billion. There was funeral assistance, 15.6 million. Emergency broadband benefit, 6.3 million. Economic injury disaster loans, 1.7 billion. And then the pandemic electronic benefit transfer, which I do not have a specific number on that. So those were direct aid programs that were included in that legislation. All of those funds have since expired. So they have been spent over the course of 2020, 2021, 2022 in some cases, with the exception of the funeral assistance program, which does not officially end until 2025. But that was a relatively small amount of the total. One of the other areas that received a lot of attention was the state and local coronavirus relief funds. These were funds received by the state and then certain metro areas. So in Nebraska, the state received $1.083 billion and Douglas County received $166 million. So under this round of the coronavirus relief funds that went to the state and localities, Douglas County was the only locality that received these. And those funds have expired in December of 2022. I don't have an exact number on how much Douglas County spent of that 166 million, but the state spent 1.08 billion of their funds. Additional programs, there was the elementary and secondary school emergency relief, which we call ESSERS. There were two phases of that, about $325 million total. Those have both since expired, and the emergency rental assistance. So relative to CARES and this Consolidated Appropriations Act, those funds have all flowed to the state of Nebraska. And it's possible that some individuals or businesses that receive funds have not expended those, but for the most part, they have been expended. And the state funds have been expended or expired. Under the American Rescue Plan Act, that's ARPA, that was passed in 2021. This also had a few direct aid programs, another round of stimulus payments, economic impact payments in March of 2021, that was 2.4 billion. There was an expansion of the child tax credit for tax year 2021, changes to the earned income tax credit to expand eligibility for the earned income tax credit for certain workers, especially workers without children. And then there were a couple of programs that just increased the federal funding that matched for state expenditure. So the SNAP program is federally funded as to aid that actually goes out under, that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. But the administrative costs are shared between the state and the federal government. So there was increase in federal aid under the program, temporary 15% increase in benefits, and then there was also additional federal funding to the states to help pay for the administrative costs. That was through federal fiscal year 2023. And then we also had an enhanced FMAP for Medicaid, which is the federal matching rate for any Medicaid expense. So it was an extra 6.2% throughout 2020, 2021, 2022. And then in the beginning of 2023, when the public health emergency ended, they tapered that down and it is now phased out. The state of Nebraska did receive an additional over $500 million federal Medicaid funds through this enhanced FMAP over the course of that time. So that wasn't per year, that's over the course of the 3 years or so that it was in effect. And then similarly to CARES under ARPA, we had the state and local coronavirus fiscal recovery funds. This was split up a little differently. The state received about 1.04 billion, which was close to what they got under the other act. But in this one, counties and cities, not just Douglas County, but a lot of counties and cities also received funding under the local provisions. So counties received about 375 million and the cities received 176 million split across all of those, all across the state. We didn't take a look at every single city and county that did get funds, but we did look at Lincoln, Omaha, Lancaster County, and Douglas County, and combined those four have spent about 65%, actually expended about 65% of the local coronavirus fiscal recovery funds that they received. The state has spent about 52% of their fiscal recovery funds as through October 15th. There were a few additional programs, Capital Projects Fund, that was $128 million, that has not expired yet. That was for specific types of capital projects. I think there were 3 types of projects eligible, including broadband. Another round of the school payments, ESSERS payments, emergency rental assistance, and there was a program for higher education for colleges. That was about $400 million received by the state. So altogether, all total, these COVID bills, it was about $19 billion under the direct aid programs and the state and local programs. That number does not include the effect of the SNAP benefits, the enhanced FMAP, or the tax credit changes. But relative to the direct programs, either to the state, local government, or to individuals and businesses, it does include that amount. Through September 30th of this year, there's about 1.1 billion of that money that has not been spent. Almost all of that is because of these 4 things. $500 million of state coronavirus fiscal recovery funds, approximately $232 million of local coronavirus fiscal recovery funds, $240 million of ESSERS money. That phase 3 ESSERS money does expire at the end of this calendar year. So what hasn't been spent will need to be spent relatively soon. And then 90 million of capital projects fund money. So the fiscal recovery funds and the capital projects fund monies can be spent through 2026. So that's about $800 million. It can be spent over the next 2 years. All of the other programs have pretty much expired. Nearly all of the programs have expired. And I included this chart. This is from S&P back in February of 2023. And I believe I included it in my board presentation then. But it shows basically the impact of these COVID bills nationally in terms of how they contribute to personal income by quarter. And you can see, beginning with the first quarter of 2023, it's a relatively small impact on personal income. So nationwide, I just want to point out in the report we included this nationwide COVID funding under these bills was about $4.6 trillion, and about 96% of it has been expended. So next, I'm just going to talk briefly about the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, that was passed in 2021, focuses on broadband, roads and bridges, public transit, water. For most of the funding, it's for fiscal year 2022 to 2026. There are a few programs where they can spend the funding longer than that. The initial allocation, and also most of it was existing programs, funding for existing roads, programs, drinking water, revolving funds, clean water, those kinds of water programs. So it's existing programs and a little bit of additional funding. For roads funding, it was a fairly modest amount of additional funding. For some of the other programs, existing programs like the drinking water state revolving loan fund and the clean water revolving loan fund, those were a larger increase in additional funds under the bill. There were also a handful of new programs. Probably the one that's gotten the most attention is the BEAD program, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment State Grant. So out of these new programs, Nebraska is about $1 billion of total funding. 400 million of that is related to this BEAD program. That is largely unspent. So that program is up and running. It's started. There's a broadband office administering those funds, but they have not spent a very big percentage of that $400 million. So that will be spent out over the coming years.
Keisha, do you have the feds signed off on Nebraska's plan?
I don't have a update on that, I guess. I don't know. Yes. And then remaining funds, out of that $1 billion remaining funds, there were allocations for airports, bridges, carbon reduction programs, the PROTECT program, which is promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost-saving transportation, which is a very long name. I see why they make an acronym. And electric vehicle program. So the funding under this act is still an ongoing expenditure, I suppose, by the state of Nebraska. Like I said, a lot of the roads funding was in the bill. That's part of that $3 billion. Is just ongoing continuation of previous amounts of roads funding that the state had gotten. But some of these others are additional amounts. And then the last one I want to talk about is the Inflation Reduction Act. This was passed in 2022. This is focused on mostly reducing pollution and energy consumption. And a lot of the programs in the bill are focused specifically on private investment. So there aren't as many direct allocations to the state. Funding can be spent all the way up through 2031. So this will be ongoing. Nebraska's allocation for specific programs currently is about $500 million. And $307 million of that is one grant. It's the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant that was just announced. It will be for federal fiscal year 24. And that is the Department of Environment and Energy. They have an 8-part plan related to several different energy related components. So none of that money has been expended. It's just a relatively recent grant award to the state. Another $91 million of that $500 million is for high efficiency electric home and the homes rebate programs. And that money also has not been expended. That has been announced and awarded, but not, I believe the application for people to apply to the department has not yet opened. So none of those funds have been expended either. So this will be, again, in comparison to some of the COVID funds, these are relatively modest amounts, but these are yet to be expended federal funds. So that's what I have on those, if you have any questions.
It's a lot of money.
Yes,
How do you keep that money from being spent?
well.
Sarcastic.
Yeah. Have you thought about how it's going to affect the forecast when it is spent?
Well, I will say, as far as the national services, like they do factor in flow of funding from the federal government to the states, and then, you know, like I showed with the COVID funding, it can have an impact on personal income, and then it tapers off, and it's taken
I
back
think you
out.
told us that 96% on a national level was spent, and we're not anywhere close to 96%. At least in the
Well, we
charts I'm
are-
seeing, like 50 and,
Yeah, in terms of the total COVID funds received by the
Uh-huh.
state, we are fairly close. So, well, there's only about 5% that hasn't been spent. About a large chunk of that, though, is the state coronavirus fiscal recovery funds, where we've only spent 52%. So, but out of the total 19 billion or so that the state did receive under those three bills, the state has expended all but a billion. So,
so there's $1 billion sitting out there.
yeah.
Should affect the forecast. I mean, if you start using,
Interest.
well, and supply, just the money supply
Yeah.
gets out in the system, it should affect both corporate and individual income. Just because people are gonna have to get paid more to work to do those projects.
Yeah, I guess.
Unless John can tell me that you have all the people you need now to work and you're not still.
I would say getting better, but not there yet. But then more to come.
Yeah.
You
Right.
said more to come.
More to come.
You know, more to come, and tell me when it's gonna be, we'll be ready, right?
Yeah,
But what you're saying is this is already baked into the numbers in your forecast, is
yeah.
these assumptions.
The assumption, because the national services included in their assumptions that it will have an impact on income in the state, especially things like the Paycheck Protection Program and the stimulus payments. But relative to projects, I mean, we have seen over the past 3 years, we've seen additional federal funds to varying levels and, this expenditure of those funds. And so depending upon the sector and the specific project, I mean, some of them, like the emergency rental assistance, like that by and large is done, but of course that affects, the real estate market and ability for landlords. So depending upon where the program was focused, some of that may have already been, part of the economic growth that we've seen already, and it may be tapering down. And then, of course, we do have this $1 billion remaining
Yeah.
to spend.
which in a lot of places isn't very much money, but in Nebraska, that's a lot of money.
It is, it is. Will this be part of your report going forward as to what is unspent?
It can be, if you'd like it to be.
I think it'd be interesting.
That's all I have.
How much money in the aggregate did Nebraska get with all these various
All
programs
of these,
approximately?
I
We got
would
$1 billion
say,
left. What did we get total?
yeah, so it was about $19 billion. Under the COVID acts, it was about $19 billion, but that doesn't, then we have to, we don't have a great number on the total amount of increased SNAP benefits. But there's another 500 million on the enhanced FMAP. And of course, there were tax benefits to individuals and businesses in Nebraska that I don't necessarily have a precise number on. Like I do know on the child tax credit under ARPA, there were about 240,000 Nebraska taxpayers that claimed that. But I don't have exact dollar figure on all of the tax provisions.
So it's 19 to 20 billion, maybe?
Yeah.
I'm surprised we survived that. That's a lot of money. $1 billion is still a lot, but
Yeah,
compared to what we've gone through, it's small. Any questions? Any more questions? Now's the time to ask. Hearing none, thank you very much, both you and your staff, for all the analysis you do to make our job a lot easier. In case. Okay, this is the time that each board member has an opportunity to talk about what's happening in their community or anything else that's on their mind that's related to me. If you don't mind, we'll start here.
Sounds good. And I'll be brief. I know Steve's anxious to get his costume on for trick or treating.
So true.
wait till I show you a picture.
Rich, you touched on it briefly, but the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act tax rates are a lot of them set to expire next year. And it has become an increasing amount of the calls and meetings that we're getting in the DC office for Senator Ricketts, which is small business owners especially that are concerned in the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. And do you think it's weighing on their decisions on investing, on hiring? I think after Tuesday and this time next week, we probably have a better idea of where those extensions may be going, which will be helpful for the February meeting. But I do think it's going to have a large impact on what our receipts look like at the state level, because I do think just getting away from the uncertainty is going to spur some more investment here in the state. So I'm probably a little more conservative on any changes I'm thinking, just because I would like to see that data before moving forward too much. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, I can echo that just based on the small business owners that we have in our market that are coming in to talk to the bank. There are a lot of people that are waiting. There's some that are saying, well, we're waiting to make these investments so we understand, these capital investments, so we understand what the tax implications are going to be for us down the road. That part makes total sense. You've got people afraid of, well, am I going to take a bunch of capital gains now because it's going to be worse down the road? So people are thinking about it a lot. And I think some of that thinking about it is shrinking what they're willing to spend, even on the consumer level right now. I would say consumer credit is beginning to be a bit of an issue. We're starting to see some slowdown in payments on the pure consumer piece. Interestingly, on housing, which has always just been crazy in the Omaha market, or has been for a long time, seems to be slowing down some, and it's because of affordability, right? People can't, interest rates are high, costs of the homes are going up, taxes, they just can't afford to buy the house that they'd like to buy. And the houses that they could probably afford, the people that are in them, refinanced or don't have a mortgage at all. And so they're not going to sell until mortgage rates come down. So that's kind of spinning on itself right now, I think. Be interested to hear what you say from a school perspective, what you're seeing with enrollment and people moving and changing, because in Millard you would have a lot of that. That part's interesting. On the commercial construction side, I'm interested to hear what you have to say there. I mean, there's cranes everywhere. There's all kinds of stuff happening. It's looking really good.
Okay.
I think from an economic development standpoint, I've never seen so many projects in all my life as I have in probably the Kearney area and up and down interstate. Department of Economic Development, I think, came out probably 6-7 months ago, said there was $1.6 billion in projects. And at that time that they had on record, and I kind of quantified what was probably up Highway 30 and Interstate 80, and there was probably 600-700 million of that. And I think in the outstate, Gothenburg has got a new chemical plant going in. There's a new beef plant going in at North Platte, which is badly needed from the ag sector. And then in Kearney, we've got, I don't know how many projects we've got going on. I couldn't write fast enough yesterday when I was talking to some of the folks that I had missed probably a week ago when I was trying to collect some information. Kearney's got a $95 million rural health complex center that's going on, and for UNMC. And in 26, we'll be training doctors in Kearney, which is which is real exciting. And, the thing that's going to cause the outstate to grow is probably educational opportunities, healthcare opportunities, and economic development. And I think we've got, probably all three going on right now. The UNMC is putting in a cancer center in Kearney along with Bryan Healthcare. And I think the UNMC, is a $52 million project. In Bryan, we kind of took a guess at when we looked at the square footage. It was like 25 million. We've got a new sportsplex going in Kearney. It's a $45 million project. It'll be down close to interstate. Then we've got 2 new hotels on the drawing board, which will take the number of rooms available for the hospitality industry up to 2,000 rooms. And it was announced about a year ago that Kearney was the second largest hospitality center. And so we're going to add on to that. The university finished up a $15.6 million regional engagement center, which has been really nice south of the campus. And just in August and September, we had $18 million in building permits for various things going on in Kearney. So that's exciting. I think I was a little concerned, and I'm involved in agriculture to a small degree, was really concerned about it the first of the year. But as the harvest wraps up and everything, we had a lot of moisture in the spring, a lot of warm weather, and the dryland farmers are getting some record yields out there, which is great. So that helps mitigate probably lower commodity prices that are out there. And beef is just really, really strong. Probably of all the commodities that we track, it's the only one that has increased over a year ago. So that'll help agriculture. And so anyway, kind of in a nutshell, it's kind of exciting what's going on.
Thank you, Tom. Steve?
I agree with Matt and Leslie with regard to what's going on in terms of people. Small businesses are being hesitant right now. Our radio buying, we see small businesses being hesitated. But part of the reason that is true is because there's so much political ads coming on the air that everybody's just sitting back waiting to see. And I think November 5th, 6th, 7th, whenever the decision gets made, that will be an important day because people will start letting their breath out and starting to think about what the ramifications are. I think there's a shift to what you were talking about earlier. The shift in housing is from new housing to redevelopment, and I think that has significantly changed the amount of. It's keeping people employed, but it's employed in redeveloping houses, and maybe someday they'll actually use some of the money from that if the government, if we ever get around to getting the applications, they can get some of the energy money out of that situation. Rich, when you were talking about the wealth effect, I wrote down, I don't think anybody feels secure right now. I mean, it's a 20% up. I mean, it's been really fast, and in fact, October has been a really good month too. And you're kind of looking at it going, when's this going to come back? So I don't think people are spending that money. I suspect that people will be contributing that money or contributing some stocks at the end of the year in order to take advantage of tax deductions on the basis of their gigantic capital gains. Or I hope they're gigantic for everybody. I think inflation is going to be higher than what Moody's and IHS are telling us. I think that we've had a bottom in energy prices. We'll get a little bit more knockdown on oil because depending on who wins the election, but natural gas is at pretty much it doesn't go any lower, and that should be a really good winter for people. That'll give them a little bit more money in their pocket to be able to spend, even if it's a cold winter. It should be good. And then the other thing that if we're looking at the outlier years, the thing I can't predict, and I defer to my friend Mr. Miltenberger, I have no idea what's going to happen with the Trump tax changes. Our base case right now is that nobody's able to get to a workable number, that the House and Senate are probably divided, and you end up with probably some kind of small incremental thing, but most of those Trump tax advantages for individuals get blown up and go away. And if that happens, then 26, 27 are going to look a whole lot different than 24 and 25 did. Just our thoughts.
Thanks, Steve. Chad?
Yeah, anecdotally, first of all, what we're seeing, I think, matches a lot of what your report has. Thank you for these reports. The amount of detail and the professionalism in these reports is outstanding. Almost too much to digest. I think we see similar things in that the economy is appears to be cooling down a little bit, where we employed 3,000 people. We had a number of unfilled jobs that now, especially the hourly jobs, we're starting to get quality applicants again. You see, we serve about 3 million meals a year. You see food prices, while it's gone back to normal inflation as opposed to, I don't know what to do with it inflation. I think when you see the projects where we're not building new schools because our schools are largely, our areas are built out. But when we're talking about maintaining our facilities, we're starting to see contractors come back in that are hungry for work and giving us solid bids, where for a number of years we couldn't find people wanting to bid on projects. So it feels like, again, only anecdotally, but it feels like the world's coming a little closer to normal with regard to enrollment. For us, it doesn't really affect with the housing market. We have neighborhoods that turn over. So people leaving, not leaving. In Millard, we can usually fill that with option enrollment. What's interesting on the enrollment side, way beyond the years in these projections, is the lower birth rates that we're starting to see, where you can see it in our kindergarten, first grade classrooms, where there aren't as many kids in the city as you would expect for the number of young adults. And I think that's a citywide issue. I think the districts that are growing, the Elkhorns, the Gretnas, the Benningtons, maybe aren't growing as fast as they would have been normally, which puts us where we're built out more in a position of competing for option enrollment kids, pulling them in from other districts. So that will be interesting as you look over the next 20 years. What impacts does that start to have to the labor market when that reverse bubble comes through?
Have you seen any increase in free and reduced lunch?
We did. It actually has gone back down a little bit again this year, and we're not sure why. The direct certification, which is one way that you can get free and reduced lunch, appears to have dipped a little bit, and we haven't really determined the why, but it's not material variances at this point.
Tom?
I was going to say, you made a comment on food and food inflation. Being a food service distributor, we measure inflation every week, and it's pretty neat how it's done, both on retail and on food service. And our inflation rate was obviously high last year, got down to 2.1% here about 6-8 weeks ago.
Yep.
And it has bounced up in just the last 3 weeks to 3.75. And this last week, I think we hit 3.85, 3.9, right in that range. So we're seeing more food inflation.
Yeah, we might be lagging a little in our data behind you because we were closer to those first numbers that you mentioned, but that might just be a little bit of lag time.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chad. As everyone knows, Tom and I come from the same city, Kearney, so he's done a real outstanding job talking about it. I'll just add a couple of things. Brenda Jensen is the city manager of Kearney, taking that position earlier this year. And her number one concern right now is the election and how it will affect the city. So it's not just obviously the private sector, it's also the public sector that is on pins and needles as it relates to how it will turn out. Probably not just in the presidential side, but also the Senate and the House as well have a profound impact. Population is still growing in Kearney. The problem is we continue to be in a dire situation when it comes to housing stock. There's just very little home construction occurring right now in Kearney. It's probably throughout the entire state, and very few proposals coming to the Planning Commission to do some additional building. So we're concerned about that in a great way. Sales tax revenue is up, but the cost of running the city is exceeding the cost of their income. So they're concerned. Kearney has a tradition of keeping their tax rate extremely low. The question is how long they might be able to keep that up if the trend continues as it is right now. Unemployment rate is still very low at 2.2%, as it is across the state of Nebraska. By and large, things are going well in currently, but things have slowed down, including home available for sales and as well as the amount of time they stay on the market when they do come on. Any questions? If not, John?
Well, everything you all have said kind of backed up everything I've been hearing about, talking to people about. Recent headline in the Wall Street Journal said economic data a mess at a critical time, and I think that's true. I mean, there's just a lot going on with everything, whether it's elections or whatever, just a lot going on. Construction's at a high point, super high point. So that kind of clouds the vision, you know. We've never seen it like this. I mean, I started in '76. There's been nothing like this, you know, it just has exploded. But then again, if you took out all the huge projects, and I don't know where you break down huge. I mean, you go to Kearney, I mean, there's projects there that you haven't seen of for a long time. You know, I've got friends of mine working on those projects. Outstate's doing great. Construction, again, is at a high point. Manpower needs, though, have certainly, the needs are still out there, but it's slowing down. The talk isn't out there about the huge shortage that we were hearing not too long ago. So I don't know if it's that they figured out another way around it, or if some of these projects have just smoothed out. In other words, doing 10 of them at the same time instead of 2 of them a year. I'm not 100% sure. I will tell you, if a contractor finds somebody that they know is really, really good help or has a special job classification, something like that, they're gone in a second. I mean, absolutely, they will not be looking for work. Line construction, electrical line construction, as you can imagine, is still going gangbusters across the country, as well in the Midwest. Hurricanes and other natural disasters are certainly causing some of that. But the data center craze, as well as utility renewables projects, are just putting a lot of work in the area continually. But lately, the utilities have slowed down on handing out work. It was said that they're kind of waiting to see, just like you said, they're waiting to see what happens here in the near future, and where they can spend the money and what's out there. Residential contractors on new work are still doing well, mostly with the new houses. One contractor I talked to said a couple of his builders are at record levels for this year. One major builder that, if you're in the business, you'll know who it is, has said that they're going to do 300 homes this year. They're predicting 500 next year and 1,000 after that. True? Who knows? You know, I mean, who knows? Somebody's got to buy them. You know, you can build anything you want, but somebody's got to buy them. You know, and at what interest rate? Supply chains are getting somewhat easier. Electronics still an issue, along with the heavy duty switchgear and transformer type. Though I did hear just this morning driving out here that residential pad mounts, which were freaking critical to the builders, that's easing up quite a bit. I'm not saying that problem's over. I also talked to a guy about cybersecurity, which is certainly way out of my bailiwick, but the electrical grid is the most dangerous one. And there's some big transformers that you put into some of these substations and stuff like that if we lose that, that's 1.5 years out. You know, you don't go down to Westlake and buy one of those, you know. You don't, there's only 2 transformer factories left in the country. So, I mean, it's a big deal. It's a real big deal. So the outlook, we can't complain about what's going on. People are employed, people are doing well. Maybe the overtime wasn't as high. You know, maybe that's some of the deal. As you said, some of the contractors, the smaller contractors, not on the bigger jobs, they could use a little something more. So I think you're right on target with what you said. Outlook's really good. Everything's lining up 2025, 26 banner years. Again, tell me what's going to happen. There's a lot of planning in the pipeline. That doesn't always create work, but it's certainly better than the alternative. In various construction journals that I look at, you get to pick which way you want to look at things, glass half full or glass half empty. Some say brilliant future, some say troubled waters. The Midwest looks awful good to me, and to me, Nebraska looks good for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. As I was going through the material provided by the respective offices and looking at the forecast, I guess one word kept going through my mind, and that was I would describe the information as just beige. It wasn't good. It wasn't bad. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't depressing. It was just beige. And as I've worked through different sectors in outstate Nebraska, I think that kind of summarizes the sentiment. As Keisha mentioned, there's record livestock revenues. It's rare in the cattle business. You have 2 years of back-to-back profits, which should be exciting. Yet we're at a historically low cow herd, and that's not rebuilding. In fact, early fall placements show that we're not building back the nation's cow herd, despite an unprecedented time of 2-year record profits and upswing in the cattle cycle as a whole. So just beige. We had a great crop year with early rains that then the spigot shut off in September and got ridiculously historically dry. That led to a lot of yield loss due to test weight and moisture of crops with kind of mediocre beige crop prices. I think there's a lot of excitement about workforce development and training programs that are out there and available. But if you talk to our rural healthcare, they still struggle with profitability and access issues in large part because of workforce challenges, but that also includes access to housing and childcare. So it just seems beige. And most people I talk to with regard to next week are equally as indifferent, just kind of want it to all get over with and start to see what's going to happen in the next week to 10 days. So as far as my outlook and kind of my approach to the next steps in our agenda, it's really just steady as she goes. And I really feel like that's the feeling among people in the state. Nobody's really hurting. Nobody's feeling rich. There's certainly some people who are hurting, but no one feels that overall kind of despair. It's just keeping moving forward and see what develops over the next few months in terms of fiscal policy, but also where our economy is going.
Just beige.
Beige.
Thanks, John. Zach?
Note to self, wear a beige suit to next
And it's going to be an amazing forecast.
Beige. See a lot of uncertainty that's holding back some activity for businesses and consumers, and not all that's election apprehension, but some of it is. And I always think it's an interesting answer when we talk to somebody about a project and they say, "Well, I got to wait to see how the election comes out," because it really does hold back some economic activity. So definitely looking forward to that, breaking loose some things and seeing how much the declining interest rates, both recently and projected, if that's going to help with that. Because I think there were also a lot of people that were holding back a little bit because rates kept going up. And I was like, well, is that going to keep happening? And so really does seem like we're positioned well for in the near term for activity. I've noticed in labor markets just an easing there and not seeing some of the issues that we saw. Positions aren't as hard to fill as they were before. Turnover's less. People seem a little more sticky than they were before, which can be good, can be bad, depending on how you look at that. Seeing the same thing that Leslie mentioned about in consumer loans, some slight uptick in past dues, and you can see some stress there. You can see some people don't have as much liquidity from some of the programs that we saw up there before, and so that's definitely a little caution there as we see that uptick. And as John said, it was really, really dry out in western Nebraska. Still had a good harvest, but prices being a little beige have kind of tempered excitement about that. Fortunately, we've got livestock market, which has been pretty good. So all in all, been an okay year economically, and hopefully in the near term, we'll break loose some activity here from reducing the uncertainty.
Question for you, Zach, and maybe Leslie also, but bank regulators, are they giving you any messages as it relates to planning the next 12 to 18 months? Any focus?
I haven't heard anything as far as like asset quality related to past due loans or anything like that. In fact, we spent a lot of time on fraud, cybersecurity, things like that, just because it affects a lot of people and takes a lot of people's money. Unfortunately, people that can't necessarily afford it. But still a lot of focus on consumer protection in terms of those regulations.
Some focus on commercial real estate,
Mm-hmm.
which neither one of our banks has a ton of, but
Yep.
retail, office, those kinds of things, those are things that the regulators are focused on and worried about asset quality on.
Yes, and I would be remiss to not mention that there's all sorts of real estate loans that reprice in the next 24 months. And those, they will
So they are,
reprice.
they are
up.
looking at that, yeah.
Yeah, so that will have an impact, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Well, that concludes this part of the meeting. It's now time to start making the forecast. So we can get the right sheet out, and we'll do the sales and use tax fiscal year 2024, 2025. We're going to do just this one right here, and then we'll do another one here, and then we'll combine probably this job.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
I need another more schedules, sorry.
That's the other super sheet, so I should scroll on the screen.
Okay, so for sales and use tax, fiscal year 25, the high is 2,535,000,000, the low is 2,488,000,000, and the average 2,500,333,000.
I'll move 2,500,000,000.
Second.
We have a motion of, is that 2.5 billion?
Yep.
And we have a second. Is there any discussion? If not, let's have a roll call, please.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes,
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes?
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Maiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Miss Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne.
yes,
Motion carries. We'll set sales and use tax at 2.5 billion. We'll now forecast the individual income tax.
Is that zero? I think it's a six. You think it's a six? Okay, so the high is 2,660,000,000, low 2,500,000,000, average 2,536,000,000.
Mr. Chairman,
Was it a zero? Okay. The high is 2,600,000,000, so that makes the average 2,529,000,000.
Jesus, my answer. I would, 2,500,000.
2,500,000,000.
Yeah, yeah, two.
Yeah, 2,500,000,000.
I come from a small town.
I'll second.
What's your motion, please?
Pardon me,
2.5?
2.5, yeah.
Second.
We have a motion and second at 2.5 billion. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Carp?
No.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger?
No.
Mr. Maiskeier?
Yes.
Mr. Celine?
No.
Ms. Anderson?
No.
Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Mr. Henning?
Yes.
It's 5-4. Okay, the motion carries. 2.5 billion.
Then we gotta pump it up to the next one.
I was just saying, I gotta figure out where I'm gonna get it.
Do the last two.
We're going to combine corporate income tax and miscellaneous taxes on the form, so if you can forecast both of those.
I'm looking the 5 plants too, so I don't think I'll be high on this one. No, it used to be.
Oh,
Okay, the high is 985,000,000, low 920,000,000, and the average is 958,000,000.
Mr. Chairman, I would 960,000,000.
We have a motion and second for 960 million. Any discussion? 960. Not roll call, please.
Mr. King?
No.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Maiskeier?
Yes.
Mr. Celine?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Mr. Henning?
Yes.
Mr. Carp?
Yes.
8-1. Motion carries. 960 million for corporate revenue. Now let's do the miscellaneous.
Okay, the high is 375,000,000, low 330,000,000, average 368,000,000.
Mr. Chairman, I propose 375.
Second.
We have a motion and second for 375 million. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger?
Yes.
Mr. Maiskeier?
Yes.
Mr. Celine?
Yes.
Ms. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Bourne?
Yes.
Mr. Henning?
Yes.
Mr. Carp?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
That was easy. Motion carries.
I wanted to.
So the total for fiscal year 24-25, $6,235 million.
Say it one more time.
$6,335 million.
335.
Mr. Chairman, I move for the total as $6,335,000,000.
Second.
There's a motion and second for $6,335,000,000. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mr. Maiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis.
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger.
Yes.
Motion carries. $6,335,000,000. We'll now work on the fiscal year 2025 or 2026. The orange form,
Is that orange?
the color.
Orange.
I'm colorblind, so
Oh,
it's what. Probably for me to go for it. I thought it was otherwise.
Really mess with them.
Helps me get on fresh on it, doesn't it?
That's it. Did you look?
Okay, the high is $2,640,000,000, low $2,575,000,000, and the average is $2,606,000,000.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that the sales tax forecast be set at $2,600,000,000.
Second.
we have a motion and second at 2.6 billion. Any discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Maiskeier.
Yes.
Motion carries. We will now look at individual income tax.
It's gold, wasn't it? What did the individual income tax do? He's got it.
2 or 3 years. That's the individual income tax for this year.
If that's mine, I'm sorry.
I think that's what it is. Maybe it's a one.
Yeah.
I think it's a one. It's a guess.
Two.
Is it a two?
Where did
I can't read that.
I'm sorry. I did that purposely.
Okay, the high is 3,200,000,000, the low is 3,090,000,000, for an average of 3,148,490,49.
Mr. Chair, I move 3,150,000,000.
Second.
We have a motion and second for $3,150,000,000. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine.
Yes.
Motion carries $3,150,000,000 for individual income tax. We will now do both corporate and miscellaneous taxes.
Yoshi.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Transfer it.
He's doing that. Yeah,
Thank you.
Get to know the answers.
The high is 900,000,000, low of 850,000,000, and the average 869,000,000.
Mr. Chair, I move 870,000,000.
Second.
We have a motion and second for $807,000,000. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine.
Yes.
Motion carries $807,000,000.
You got to vote it. Mine was good.
The high is 330,000,000, low of 320,000,000, the average 327,000,000.
Anyone care to make a motion?
330 million.
Second.
We have a motion and second for $330,000,000. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Motion.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne.
Yes.
Motion carries $330,000,000.
The total for fiscal year 26 is 6,950,000,000.
Mr. Chairman, I move we adopt total revenues for fiscal year 25-26 at $6,950,000,000.
Second.
We have a motion and second for $6,950,000,000. Roll call, please.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. Keen,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning.
Yes.
Motion carries. We will now address fiscal year 26-27 sales and use tax.
Okay, the high is 2,725,000,000, the low is 2,650,000,000, and the average is 2,702,000,000.
Mr. Chair, I'll move 2,700,000,000.
Second.
We have a motion and second for 2,700,000,000. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp.
Yes.
Motion carries. We'll now do individual income tax.
Did you do scientific calculation?
Okay, the high is 3,200,000,000, the low is 3,100,000,000, and the average is 3,140,000,000.
Mr. Chair, I'll move 3,140,000,000.
Second.
We have a motion and second for 3,140,000,000. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King.
Yes.
Motion carries. We'll now do corporate income tax and miscellaneous taxes.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay, the high is 850,000,000, yeah, 850,000,000, the low is 800,000,000, and the average is 826,000,000.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move 825,000,000.
Second it.
We have a motion and second for 825,000,000. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis.
Yes. Motion carries 825,000,000. Miscellaneous taxes.
Oh, yeah.
You know what?
There's an outlier. The high is 315 million, and the low is 300 million, and the average is 302 million.
I'll make a motion at 300 million.
Second.
We have a motion and second for 300 million. Discussion, hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes,
Mr. Miltenberger.
Yes.
motion carries.
The total for fiscal year 27 is 6,965 million.
Mr. Chair, I move the total be 6,965,000,000. Did I read that right?
Yes.
Yep. Second.
Second.
Second, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Previous year.
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes,
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier.
Yes.
motion carries. Thank you. Okay, that concludes the forecasting part of our meeting. It's now time to select the date for our next meeting in February.
Hard part.
The 28th is on a Friday.
It is on Friday.
How do you feel about that?
That's good. That's fine.
Okay. To members of the board, Friday the 28th, if so, morning, afternoon, what's your preference? Can anyone first make that date?
I gotta fly back,
February the 20th.
but then again, I'm gone the whole month. Doesn't matter. So, I mean, it just doesn't matter.
Okay.
Let's go to the morning.
What's the preference, morning, afternoon?
Afternoon actually works a little easier for me, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I can move it, I can move it around. I have some
And,
appointments around if morning's better for everyone else.
Okay, so we have one.
Makes no difference. I'll flow with the rest.
Okay, 1 o'clock on Friday, the 28th. Let's have a motion and second to set that date.
So
Second.
We have a motion and second. Roll call, please.
Ms. Anderson,
yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes,
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier,
Yes.
Mr. Celine.
Yes.
motion carries. Agenda item number 12. Anyone want to address the board for anything? It's public comment time. Let the record show that nobody showed interest in doing so today. Okay, it's time to adjourn. Make a motion, a second to adjourn the meeting.
To adjourn.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Celine,
Yes.
Ms. Anderson,
Yes.
Mr. Bourne,
Yes.
Mr. Henning,
Yes.
Mr. Carp,
Yes.
Mr. King,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes,
Mr. Miltenberger,
Yes.
Mr. Meiskeier.
Yes.
motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies.
Thank you.